The moment my wife became a billionaire CEO, she handed me divorce papers and called me a relic of her past. She has no idea I secretly own her entire empire, and I'm about to pull the ladder out from under her. The ink wasn't even dry on her new contract as the chief executive officer of Sterling Global when Elena handed me the manila envelope. We were sitting in the dining room of our new penthouse, a glass-walled fortress overlooking the city lights. A home I had spent the last decade making sure she could afford. The air smelled like expensive lilies and the cold, metallic scent of the rain hitting the reinforced windows. Elena didn't look like the woman I married 10 years ago. Back then, her hair was usually in a messy bun, and her hands were stained with cheap ink from a printer that constantly jammed. Now, she was draped in silk that cost more than my first car, her expression as sharp and polished as a diamond. She didn't say a word at first. She just slid the envelope across the mahogany table with a flick of her manicured finger. I knew what it was before I even opened it. You don't live with someone for a decade without learning the rhythm of their betrayals. "I think it's time we face reality, Mark," she said, her voice devoid of the warmth that used to be my only sanctuary during the hard years. "We've grown apart, or more accurately, I've grown. And you've stayed exactly where you were." I looked down at the gold-embossed petition for dissolution of marriage, peering out from the folder. A dull ache started in my chest, not the sharp sting of surprise, but the heavy, crushing weight of a long-expected catastrophe. I thought about the 3 jobs I worked while she was in law school. I thought about the nights I stayed awake until 4 a.m., proofreading her briefs until my eyes bled, only to wake up at 6 a.m. to go haul concrete at a construction site. I thought about the time I sold my father's vintage 1967 Mustang, the only thing I had left of him, just to pay for her bar exam prep courses and the wardrobe she needed for her first real interviews. "You're staying where I was?" I repeated, my voice raspy. "Elena, I'm the reason you're standing on this floor right now. I built the ladder you climbed." She let out a short, hollow laugh, reclining in her chair. "That's exactly the kind of small-minded thinking I can't have in my life anymore. You think paying a few bills and supporting me entitles you to a seat at this table forever? Mark, look at yourself. You're a middle manager at a logistics firm. You smell like stale coffee and spreadsheets. I am moving in circles where people change the world. You're just a reminder of a version of myself that I've outgrown. You're a relic of my struggle. And frankly, your presence is becoming an embarrassment." The word embarrassment hit harder than any physical blow could. I looked at the woman I had worshipped, the woman I had sacrificed my own dreams of becoming an architect for, so she could pursue hers. I had deferred my life for a decade, pouring every ounce of my energy, my finances, and my emotional labor into her engine. I was the fuel, and she was the rocket. Now that she had reached the stars, she was jettisoning the fuel tank because it was dead weight. "I gave up everything for you," I whispered. "I have nothing of my own because I gave it all to you. My inheritance, my time, my youth. I didn't just pay a few bills. I funded your entire existence for 7 years." Elena sighed, looking at her watch, a Patek Philippe that I had bought her for her last birthday, a gift that had wiped out my secret savings account. "You'll get a settlement, of course, a generous one. I'm not cruel, but I want you out by the end of the week. My new life doesn't have room for a husband who looks like he belongs in a suburban strip mall. My associates are starting to ask questions about why the powerful Elena Sterling is tied to a man with no ambition." She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and began to walk toward her home office, dismissive and final. It was the walk of a woman who believed she was untouchable. She truly believed that her success was a solo flight, that my sacrifices were just the background noise of her inevitable rise. She had forgotten the most important thing. She had forgotten that power isn't just about who sits in the big chair. It's about who holds the keys to the foundation. I stayed seated, my hand resting on the divorce papers. My mind raced back to 5 years ago, to a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Elena was still a junior associate and we were facing bankruptcy because of her father's gambling debts. I remembered the document I had her sign in our old cramped apartment, the one she had barely looked at because she was too busy crying over the eviction notice. I had told her it was just a standard power of attorney to help me manage the debt consolidation, but it wasn't just that. "Elena," I called out, my voice steadying. She paused at the doorway, looking back with an irritated tilt of her head. "What now, Mark? If you're going to beg, don't. It's pathetic." "I'm not begging," I said, finally looking her in the eye. "I just wanted to ask, have you checked the secondary clauses in the Sterling Global acquisition of the Miller Group? You know, the merger that officially made you CEO this morning?" She frowned, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about? That was a private equity move. It has nothing to do with you." "Doesn't it?" I stood up, feeling a strange, cold calm wash over me. The Miller Group wasn't just a random firm, Elena. It was a shell company funded by the very inheritance you thought I spent on your tuition. I didn't spend all of it. I invested the last $50,000 into a startup that eventually bought out the debt of your current firm's parent company. Elena's face paled, just a fraction. "That's impossible. You don't have the brains for that kind of financial maneuvering." "You're right," I said, walking toward her. "I didn't. But I had the heart to protect you from your own family's mess. And in doing so, I made sure that the person who truly owns the controlling interest of Sterling Global isn't the board of directors. And it certainly isn't you." Her phone began to vibrate on the table. She glanced at it, and I saw the caller ID. Chairman of the board. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her eyes fixed on me. "The papers you just handed me," I said, nodding toward the divorce settlement. "If I sign them, I'm officially no longer family, and the loyalty clause in the merger contract states that if you divorce the primary shareholder of the holding company without a pre-negotiated exit, your CEO contract is automatically voided for cause. You'd lose everything. The title, the stock options, this penthouse, all of it, in 30 seconds. She stared at the screaming phone, then back at me, the arrogance in her eyes flickering into a raw, naked terror. "You wouldn't," she breathed. I picked up the pen she had left on the table. "You told me I was a reminder of a life you wanted to forget, Elena. Maybe it's time I helped you forget it entirely." I hovered the pen over the signature line of the divorce papers. My phone chimed with a text from my lawyer. "The board is waiting for your signal. 1 word, and she's out." Elena took a step toward me, her hand outstretched. "Mark, wait. Let's talk about this. I was just stressed. The new job, the pressure. The pressure didn't make you call me an embarrassment," I said, my thumb clicking the pen. "The power did." I looked down at the paper, then at the woman who had become a stranger. I was 1 stroke of ink away from taking back everything I had given her. But as I looked into her desperate eyes, I realized there was 1 more secret she didn't know. A secret that would turn this entire divorce into something much more dangerous than a simple loss of a job. Elena's hand hovered over her phone, the screen still flashing with the chairman's name. The confidence that had defined her for the last year, the armor she wore like a second skin, was cracking. I could see the frantic calculations behind her eyes. She was a lawyer by trade and a shark by nature. She was looking for the loophole, the exit strategy, the way to spin this so she remained on top. "You're lying," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "You don't have the capital to fund a holding company like that. You're a middle manager, Mark. You make 6 figures, not 8. Where would you get that kind of money?" "I told you," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie of my own life. My inheritance. "You thought it was just the $50,000 from my father's life insurance. You never bothered to look at the trust my grandfather set up. You were too busy focusing on your own climb to realize that while you were playing the game, I was buying the stadium. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. This time, it wasn't the chairman. It was her lead counsel, a man named Marcus Thorne, who made a living out of making people's problems disappear. "Answer it, Elena," I said. "He's probably calling to tell you that the SEC has just flagged the Sterling Miller merger for a structural anomaly," which is a polite way of saying they've realized the CEO's husband is the primary beneficiary of the deal's largest creditor. She snatched the phone, her knuckles white. "Marcus, what is it?" No, I'm with him now. What do you mean, frozen? That's impossible. I haven't signed the final divestment papers yet." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a realization that went beyond losing her job. I watched her face turn from pale to ghostly. She hung up without saying goodbye, the phone slipping from her fingers and thudding onto the thick rug. "The merger assets," she breathed. "They're tied to your approval. If we divorce today, if you sign those papers as a hostile party, the entire acquisition collapses. Sterling Global will be insolvent by morning." "I know," I said. "I designed it that way. Not because I wanted to hurt you, Elena, but because I knew this day would come. I saw the way you looked at me when you got your first junior partnership. I saw the way you started leaving me out of the firm dinners, the way you started forgetting to introduce me to your new friends. I knew that the more power I gave you, the more you would see me as a burden. I didn't build this to trap you. I built it as a mirror. I wanted to see if you'd still love the man who gave you everything, even when you didn't think you needed him anymore." She let out a dry, jagged sob, but it didn't sound like grief. It sounded like rage. "You manipulated me. You let me think I was doing this on my own. All those nights I worked until I collapsed, you were just playing God behind the scenes. That's not love, Mark. That's a sick, twisted form of control." "Control?" I stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Is that what you call it? What about the night in 2018, Elena? Have you forgotten about the Henderson file?" She froze. The rage died instantly, replaced by a cold, paralyzing dread. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her eyes darted toward the window. "You do. You leaked the confidential merger details to your father so he could bail himself out of his gambling debts. You were young, you were desperate, and you were about to be disbarred and sent to prison before your career even started. You came home crying, telling me your life was over." I stepped closer to her, the ghost of that night haunting the space between us. "I didn't just support you then. I went to the senior partner. I told him I was the one who had seen the file on your laptop. I told him I was the one who leaked it. I took a voluntary resignation from a career I loved so they wouldn't press charges against you. I fell on my sword so you could keep your shield. And then I spent the next 3 years working 3 low-level jobs to pay off the private settlement I negotiated with the firm to keep them quiet. You didn't just grow, Elena. You were built on the bones of my reputation." Elena backed away, hitting the edge of the mahogany table. You told me the firm just decided not to pursue it. You told me it was a mistake in their filing system." "I lied to protect your ego," I said. "I wanted you to believe you were as perfect as you wanted to be. But now you're calling me an embarrassment. You're telling me I've stayed in the same place while you've soared. The only reason you're soaring is because I'm the wind beneath your wings, and I'm tired of blowing, Elena. I'm exhausted." I picked up the pen again. The divorce papers were right there. If I signed them, she would be ruined. The SEC would descend. The board would fire her for cause, to protect themselves from the scandal, and the Henderson file, which I had kept a digital copy of in a secure vault, would likely find its way to the district attorney's office. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out, her fingers brushing my sleeve. This wasn't the CEO. This was the girl from the cramped apartment, the one who used to need me. But I didn't see the woman I loved anymore. I saw a predator who only became a prey when she realized she'd lost her bite. We can fix this. I'll tear up the papers. We can go back to how it was. I'll make it up to you. I'll acknowledge everything you did. Just don't sign. Don't destroy everything we've built." "We didn't build this," I said, looking around the cold, sterile penthouse. "I built this. You just moved in." I lowered the pen to the signature line. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic vibration of her phone on the floor. Just as the tip of the pen touched the paper, a heavy, rhythmic pounding echoed through the hallway. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor or the concierge. It was the sound of authority. Elena and I both turned toward the door. "Police, open up! We have a warrant for the arrest of Elena Sterling and a search warrant for these premises." Elena's face went completely bloodless. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. "Mark, did you call them?" I looked at the door, then back at her, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hadn't called the police. I had planned to ruin her financially and professionally, but I hadn't moved on the criminal side yet. I wasn't ready to send the woman I once loved to a cell. "I didn't call them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The door groaned under the weight of a battering ram. Elena scrambled toward the back of the penthouse, toward her office, but she stopped when she saw something on the monitors of her home security system. "Mark," she gasped, pointing at the screen that showed the hallway outside. It wasn't just the police. Standing behind the officers was a man in a sharp gray suit, a man I recognized instantly. It was Sarah's brother, Sarah, the woman who had been the lead investigator on the Henderson file years ago. The woman who had mysteriously disappeared from the legal scene right after I took the fall. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking directly into the security camera, and he was holding up a folder, the exact same color and shape as the one I had hidden in my private vault, the vault that only 2 people had the code to, me and the person I had trusted more than anyone in the world. I looked at Elena. She looked at me. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been keeping secrets. The door burst open with a deafening crack. The front door didn't just open, it disintegrated. The sound was a deafening crack of splintering wood and metal, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots on the polished hardwood floors. Within seconds, the cold, sterile air of the penthouse was filled with the harsh glow of tactical flashlights and the shouted commands of men who didn't care about the price of the furniture they were overturning. "Hands where I can see them! Now, down on the ground!" Elena screamed. A high, thin sound of pure terror that I hadn't heard since the night her father's debt collectors had cornered us in our first apartment. She collapsed to her knees, her silk dress pooling around her like a spilled glass of expensive wine. I didn't move as quickly. I stood there, the pen still in my hand, staring at the chaos. A red laser dot danced across my chest, settling over my heart. "Down, Mark! Get down!" Elena shrieked. But I was focused on the man walking through the wreckage of our doorway. Julian Thorne didn't look like a Fed. He looked like an undertaker. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection, and his eyes were as gray as the city sky outside. He didn't have a weapon drawn. He didn't need one. He carried the folder, the one from my vault, under his arm like a trophy. Behind him, the police were already zip-tying Elena's wrists. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice calm amidst the shouting. "It's been a long time. Not since the Henderson inquiry. You look tired." "Julian," I managed to say, my throat feeling like it was filled with glass. "What is this? This wasn't part of the plan." Elena's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "Plan? Mark, what plan? What did you do?" Julian ignored her, walking over to the mahogany table and tossing the folder down next to the divorce papers. "The plan changed, Mark. You see, when you've spent 10 years building a fortress of secrets, you shouldn't give the keys to someone with a conscience." I felt the floor drop out from under me. The vault. The code. I had given it to only one person, my sister, Clara. She was the only family I had left after my father died. She was the one who had watched me bleed myself dry for Elena, the one who had sat with me in hospital waiting rooms when I collapsed from exhaustion after working double shifts at the construction site. She had hated Elena from the start, calling her a parasite in a designer suit. "Where is Clara?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She's safe," Julian said, a small, cruel smile touching his lips. "She's also my star witness. You see, Mark, you thought you were using that shell company to protect your assets and keep Elena in check. But Clara saw it differently. She saw a brother who was becoming just as corrupt as the woman he was trying to control. She didn't want the money, and she didn't want the power. She just wanted her brother back. So she brought me everything." Elena let out a jagged laugh, her face pressed against the rug as an officer held her down. "So it wasn't just me? You're going down too, Mark. You and your sacrifices. You're a money launderer. You're a criminal." "Quiet, Mrs. Sterling," Julian snapped. "You're in quite enough trouble on your own. The Henderson leak, the insider trading during the Miller merger, we have it all. But Mark?" He turned back to me, his expression softening into something that looked dangerously like pity. "You're the one who signed the checks. You're the one whose name is on the offshore accounts. You thought you were the architect of her success, but you were really just the fall guy you always were. You just didn't realize it this time." I looked at the folder. I did it for her. Every penny I moved, every account I opened. It was to ensure she had a foundation. I wasn't laundering money for profit, Julian. I was building a safety net. "A safety net made of stolen thread is still a trap," Julian replied. He signaled to the officers. "Take her out. We'll process Mr. Sterling here." As they hauled Elena up, she fought against their grip. She looked at me, and for a split second, the CEO mask was gone. In its place was the woman I had loved, frightened, desperate, and utterly broken. "Mark, help me," she sobbed. "You said you'd always protect me. You said you'd do anything for me." "I did," I whispered, the pen finally falling from my numb fingers. "I did everything. That was the problem." They dragged her out, her screams echoing down the hallway until the heavy door was shut, leaving me alone in the wreckage with Julian. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. Julian pulled out a chair, the one Elena had just been sitting in, and sat down. He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper that I didn't recognize. It wasn't part of the Henderson files. It wasn't the bank records. It was a medical report dated 3 months ago. "You've been very busy, Mark," Julian said. "Working 3 jobs, managing a secret financial empire, keeping a failing marriage on life support. It takes a toll on a man. But I think there's something you've been keeping from Elena, something even your sister didn't know until she found this in the back of your safe." My heart began to race. I knew what that paper was. It was the reason I had been so desperate to finalize the merger. It was the reason I had pushed so hard to give Elena the power she craved, even if it meant risking my own freedom. I thought I had more time. I thought I could secure her future and then quietly disappear before the end came. "Is that why you did it?" Julian asked, sliding the medical report across the table. "Is that why you sacrificed your reputation, your career, and your freedom? Because you knew you wouldn't be around to see the fallout?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. "It's a noble thing in a twisted sort of way," Julian continued, "to take the blame for a decade of sins because you're a dying man with nothing left to lose. But there's one thing you missed, Mark. One detail that changes everything." He flipped the medical report over. On the back was a handwritten note in a script I knew all too well. It wasn't my doctor's handwriting. It was Elena's. "She knew," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "She didn't just know, Mark," Julian said, his eyes narrowing. "She's been the one filing the anonymous tips to the SEC for the last 6 months. She wasn't just trying to divorce you. She was trying to make sure you were behind bars before you ever had the chance to die in a hospital bed. She wanted the money. She wanted the power, and she wanted you out of the way so she could claim the widow's share of the estate without the inconvenience of a funeral. The room began to spin. Every sacrifice, every night of manual labor, every lie I told to protect her, she had turned it all into a weapon. She hadn't just outgrown me. She'd been hunting me. But that's not the best part, Julian said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. There's a reason she was so eager to get rid of you right now. Something she found out about your father's Mustang that you sold all those years ago. You told her it was the only thing you had left of him, right? It was, I said, my voice shaking. No, Mark, it wasn't. Julian pulled out a final photo from the folder. It was a picture of an old, rusted key sitting in a safety deposit box. The Mustang wasn't the inheritance. The Mustang was the key to a warehouse in New Jersey that's been sitting untouched for 20 years. A warehouse filled with your father's art collection. Only, it wasn't art. It was something that makes your little shell company look like a lemonade stand. Julian stood up, looking at the door where Elena had been taken. She found the warehouse, Mark, but she couldn't get inside without your signature on those divorce papers, specifically the asset release clause on page 12, the one you were just about to sign. I looked down at the paper. My signature was halfway finished. I had almost given her the one thing that would have made her the most powerful woman in the country. So, Julian said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pair of handcuffs, you have a choice. You can come with me and testify against her, and maybe, just maybe, I can get you into a clinical trial that might save your life. Or you can finish that signature, let her win, and die in a prison cell, knowing you gave everything to a woman who wanted you dead. I looked at the pen. I looked at the door. And then I looked at the security monitor. The man in the sharp gray suit, Sarah's brother, wasn't there anymore. But someone else was. A figure was standing in the shadows of the hallway, watching the police lead Elena away. It was Clara. And she wasn't crying. She was smiling. But it wasn't a smile of relief. It was the smile of someone who had just finished a very long, very patient game of her own. As she looked into the camera, she held up a small black remote, the kind used to trigger a silent alarm or a bomb. The penthouse lights flickered, and a low humming sound began to vibrate through the floorboards. "Julian," I said, my voice cold, "I don't think we're leaving." The vibration under my feet grew from a low hum to a bone-shaking roar. Julian Thorne, the man who had seemed so unshakably in control just a moment ago, stumbled, his hand flying to the mahogany table for balance. The lights in the penthouse flickered, a violent, rhythmic pulsing, and then the massive floor-to-ceiling windows began to frost over. Not from cold, but from the emergency tinting system being pushed to its absolute limit. "What is that?" Julian shouted over the noise. "Mark, what did you do?" "I told you," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I didn't do this. That remote in Clara's hand. She isn't triggering my failsafe. She's triggering the real one." In the hallway, the sound of the police officers' radios turned into a cacophony of white noise and screeching feedback. On the security monitor, I saw them clutching their ears, their tactical gear sparking. The electromagnetic pulse wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the very walls of the penthouse. I looked at the monitor one last time before it turned into a screen of static. Clara was still there, standing perfectly still in the middle of the chaos. She blew a kiss toward the camera, her eyes cold and triumphant, and then she vanished into the smoke. "The server room," Julian gasped, reaching for his sidearm. "She's burning the data. All the evidence against Elena, all the bank records. She's wiping it." "She's not just wiping the evidence, Julian," I said, the realization dawning on me with sickening clarity. "She's wiping me." I lunged for the folder Julian had dropped, the one with the medical report, the one with the secret note from Elena. As the room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the red emergency strobes. I scrambled for the photo of the rusted key. Julian grabbed my shoulder, his grip like iron. "You're coming with me, Sterling. We need to get out before the oxygen suppression system kicks in." "Look at the photo," I screamed, shoving it into his face under the flash of a red strobe. "Look at the key. It's not for a warehouse in New Jersey." Julian squinted at the photo. Even in the dim, chaotic light, the etching on the base of the key was unmistakable. It wasn't a manufacturer's mark. It was a crest, a serpent coiled around a gavel, the crest of the Thorne family. Julian froze. His hand dropped from my shoulder. The Undertaker mask finally shattered, and for the first time, I saw a man who was genuinely terrified. "My father," Julian whispered. "He told me he lost it. He told me the Sterling family stole it 30 years ago." "My father didn't steal it, Julian," I said, my voice shaking as the air in the room began to thin. The automated fire suppression system was sucking the oxygen out to kill the fire in the servers. "He was the architect who built it for your father. The art collection. It's not paintings. It's the vault beneath the state capitol. The one where your father kept the ledgers for the last 3 decades of contributions from every major corporation in the state, including Sterling Global." The sound of the front door being hammered from the outside returned, but this time it wasn't the police. It was a rhythmic, metallic clanging. Someone was welding the door shut from the hallway. "Clara," I gasped, my lungs beginning to burn. "She isn't working for you, Julian. She's working for the board. They don't want Elena in jail. They don't want me dead from a disease. They want us all buried in this tomb so the ledgers never come to light." Julian pulled his gun and fired at the frosted glass of the window, but the reinforced pane didn't even chip. It was designed to withstand a sniper round. It certainly wasn't going to break for a 9mm. "We're trapped," Julian said, his voice dropping to a hollow rasp. He looked at me, the man he had come to arrest, with a strange, dark irony. 10 years of sacrifice, Mark. You gave up everything for a woman who betrayed you, a sister who sold you out, and a father who left you a legacy that's about to become your coffin." I sank to the floor, the lack of oxygen making my head light. My vision was tunneling. I looked at the divorce papers, still sitting on the table. In the red light, the ink looked like blood. I thought about Elena, likely already being loaded into a transport vehicle downstairs. Or was she? If the board was cleaning house, they wouldn't let the star witness live to reach the precinct. "The pen!" I wheezed, pointing to the table. Julian looked at me like I was insane. "What?" "The pen. It's not a pen." I reached up, my fingers trembling, and grabbed the heavy, gold-plated instrument I had used to almost sign away my life. I twisted the cap 3 times to the left and pressed the pocket clip. A small, high-frequency tone emitted from the device. It was a short-range override I had installed years ago when I first designed the penthouse's security suite. I hadn't told Elena about it. I hadn't even told Clara. It was the only secret I had kept entirely for myself. The hum of the oxygen suppression slowed, then stopped. The red strobes died, replaced by a soft amber auxiliary light. One of the hidden panels in the mahogany-paneled wall clicked open, revealing a narrow, dark passage. "A service crawlway?" Julian asked, his hope returning. "A way out," I said, coughing violently. "But it only leads to one place, the garage. If we're lucky, the EMP didn't fry my old Mustang. It's the only car in this building that isn't connected to a computer." We scrambled into the narrow passage just as the sound of the welding outside stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. We moved through the dark, cramped space, the scent of old grease and cold stone filling my nose. My body was failing me. The exertion was pulling at the threads of my health, but the adrenaline kept me upright. We reached the garage level 10 minutes later. The air here was heavy with exhaust and the smell of ozone. Most of the luxury SUVs and electric sedans were dead, their digital brains cooked by the pulse. But in the far corner, under a dusty tarp, sat the '67 Mustang. Wait, the Mustang. I had told Elena I sold it. I had lied to her. I had kept it hidden in this sublevel for years, a piece of my father I couldn't let go of. Get in, I told Julian. I reached for the door handle, but I stopped. The tarp wasn't draped the way I had left it. It was pulled back just enough to reveal the driver's side door. And sitting in the driver's seat, her hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, was Elena. She wasn't in handcuffs. Her silk dress was torn at the shoulder, and her hair was a mess, but her eyes were as sharp as they had ever been. She looked at me through the glass, and then she looked at Julian. She didn't look surprised to see us. She looked like she had been waiting. "You really should have checked the trunk before you hid this car, Mark," she said, her voice muffled by the glass but clear enough to chill my marrow. "You thought you were the only one who knew about the key. I've had the real key for months. The one in your vault was a decoy I planted." She held up a small, ancient-looking brass key, the twin to the one in the photo, but this one was stained with something dark and dried. "I didn't want a divorce, Mark," she said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "I wanted the inheritance, all of it. And now that you've kindly opened the back door for me..." She turned the ignition. The Mustang's engine roared to life with a guttural, analog scream that echoed through the concrete garage. "Elena, stop!" Julian shouted, raising his gun. But she didn't look at him. She looked at me. "You told me you were the ladder I climbed, Mark. But you forgot one thing about ladders. Once you reach the top, you don't need them anymore. You just kick them away." She slammed the car into gear, but she didn't drive toward the exit. She spun the wheel and accelerated directly toward us, the heavy steel bumper of the Mustang aiming straight for my chest. As the car hurtled toward me, I realized one final devastating truth. The note on the back of the medical report, the one Julian showed me, it wasn't Elena's handwriting. I looked at Julian as he pulled the trigger, and in the flash of the muzzle, I saw the serpent crest on his cufflink. He hadn't come to arrest her. He had come to fetch her. The roar of the Mustang's 289 V8 engine was a physical force, a primal scream that bounced off the concrete walls of the underground garage. I didn't have time to think. As the car's front bumper dipped, accelerating toward me, I didn't dive for cover. I did the only thing I knew how to do, the thing I had been doing for Elena for 10 years. I stood my ground and looked her right in the eyes. Julian's gunshot didn't hit Elena. It didn't even hit the car. He fired into the overhead fire suppression main. A massive torrent of pressurized water and chemical foam erupted from the ceiling, creating a whiteout curtain between us and the charging vehicle. The Mustang's tires shrieked as Elena slammed on the brakes, the car fishtailing in the slick, soapy mess. The bumper stopped inches from my knees. The garage was filled with the hiss of water and the thrumming of the engine. "Get in the car, Elena!" Julian shouted, moving toward the passenger side. "We have the key. We don't need him anymore." Elena's face was a mask of frantic greed. She unlocked the door for Julian, her eyes never leaving mine. She looked at me, not with regret, but with the cold irritation of someone looking at a piece of luggage they couldn't quite fit into the trunk. "Goodbye, Mark," she mouthed through the glass. "Thanks for everything." The Mustang roared again, its rear tires spinning in the foam before catching grip on the dry concrete near the exit ramp. They sped away, the red taillights disappearing into the darkness of the rising tunnel. I stood alone in the rain of the fire sprinklers, soaked to the bone, my lungs burning with every shallow breath. I looked at the gold pen in my hand. I wasn't dying. Not yet. The medical report Julian had shown me, the one with the terminal diagnosis, was a forgery. But it wasn't Elena who had forged it, and it wasn't Julian. I pulled a small, dry microfiber cloth from my pocket and wiped the lens of my glasses. Then I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the real medical report. "Stable," it said, "in remission." I had leaked the fake report to Clara months ago. I knew she was the only one Julian Thorne would trust, And I knew that if Clara thought I was dying, she would try to save me the only way she knew how, by burning the world down around me so I could die in peace. She hadn't betrayed me. She had been the bait in the trap I had set for both of them. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a secure line. I answered it. "They're on the move, Mark." Clara's voice was steady, devoid of the coldness I had seen on the security monitor. "They have the brass key. They're heading for the state capitol vault." "And the board?" I asked, walking toward a small, nondescript gray sedan parked in the shadows. "The board thinks Julian is bringing them the ledgers to destroy them. They have no idea he's planning to use them for blackmail to take over the firm himself. Elena thinks she's going to be his queen. They're all exactly where you wanted them." "Good," I said, getting into the car. "Initiate phase 2. I drove out of the garage, the city lights blurring past. I had spent a decade being the foundation. I had been the silent partner, the fall guy, the provider. Elena thought she had outgrown me, but you can't outgrow the person who owns the very ground you walk on. An hour later, I stood in the shadows of the Capitol's sub-basement. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. I watched from a darkened maintenance alcove as Julian and Elena approached the massive circular steel door of the vault, the one my father had designed. "This is it," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. She held up the brass key. "The Sterling legacy, everything Mark kept from me." Julian stepped back, his hand on his holster, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Open it. Once we have the ledgers, the board is finished. We'll own Sterling Global. We'll own this city." Elena inserted the key into the central lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. The massive gears behind the steel began to grind, a sound like a mountain shifting. The vault door slowly swung open, revealing nothing. The room was empty. No ledgers, no gold, no art collection. There was only a single small wooden table in the center of the room, and on it sat a laptop, its screen glowing in the dark. Elena stepped inside, her heels clicking on the stone floor. "Where is it? Where are the files?" Julian followed her, his face contorting with rage. "You said the key was here. You said he was hiding it." I stepped out from the shadows, my silhouette framed by the hallway light. "He wasn't hiding money, Julian. He was hiding the truth." They both spun around. Julian pulled his gun, but he froze when he saw the red laser dots appearing on his chest. From the ventilation ducts and the darkened corners of the vault, 6 tactical teams from the Federal Bureau of Investigation emerged, their weapons leveled. "Drop the weapon, Mr. Thorne," a voice boomed. It was Sarah, Julian's former investigator, the woman who had disappeared. She walked into the light holding a badge. "I've been waiting for this since the Henderson case." Julian dropped the gun, his hands shaking. "Mark, what is this?" I walked into the vault, standing next to the table. "My father didn't build this vault to store secrets, Julian. He built it as a pressure trap. The moment that brass key turned in the lock, it didn't just open the door. It sent a digital packet to the Department of Justice. 10 years of Julian Thorne's contributions, Elena's insider trading, and the board's money laundering. Every single byte of data I've been collecting while I was working 3 jobs to support you." Elena looked at the laptop, then at me. The realization finally hit her. She hadn't been the shark. She had been the bait. "You did this," she hissed, her voice cracking. "You ruined everything, after everything I worked for?" "You didn't work for this, Elena," I said, my voice calm and cold. "I worked for this. I built this. I even built the power you thought you had. I wanted to see if you were the woman I married, or if you were just the title on your business card. You gave me your answer the moment you handed me those divorce papers." Sarah stepped forward, clicking handcuffs onto Elena's wrists. "Elena Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, insider trading, and attempted murder." As they led her away, she stopped in front of me. The arrogance was gone. The silk dress was ruined. She looked small. "Mark," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears, I can fix this. We can use the money. I'll tell them you were forced to do it. We can still have the life we planned." I looked at the woman I had loved, the woman I had sacrificed my youth and my health for. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just the quiet relief of a heavy weight finally being set down. "The life we planned was a lie, Elena," I said, "because I was the only one planning it." They dragged her and Julian out of the vault. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had heard in a decade. Clara walked into the room, leaning against the vault door. "You okay, big brother?" "I'm fine, Clara," I said, closing the laptop. "How's the car?" "The Mustang?" "Totaled," she laughed. "But don't worry, I made sure the insurance policy you took out on it yesterday was very comprehensive. You'll be able to buy a fleet of them." We walked out of the Capitol together, the morning sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The middle manager was gone. The embarrassment was gone. As I watched the police cars disappear into the city, I realized that Elena was right about one thing. I hadn't grown. I hadn't changed. I was still the man who would do anything to protect the things I loved. I just finally learned that the person I needed to protect most was myself. I took the gold pen from my pocket and dropped it into a trash can as we passed. The ink was dry. The story was finished. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't have to sacrifice anything to see the sun rise.